Hi everyone, hope you're all well. So some of you know I've recently launched on Patreon, which so far has been amazing. So I thought I'd also start to do some short focus tutorials every few weeks on YouTube as well, basically practicing professional coloured pencil techniques. So I thought I'd start with a dog's nose for the first one in this series of focus tutorials. Materials wise, I'm working on extra white hot pressed Fabriano Artistico paper, which is a watercolour paper. If you've not used this paper before, it's excellent for coloured pencils. It's smooth, but it's still got like a bit of a tooth to it. And for pencils, I'm using FABERCASTELL Polychromos and CARAN D'ACHE Luminance pencils. So to start then, I've sketched my basic outline of the dog's nose and I'm just drawing in a base layer with a pink-white luminance pencil on the top half of the nose and bringing that down the centre crease. You want to apply quite a light to medium pressure, basically just to get a really nice even coverage. Then using a dark sepia polychromo, making sure it's really sharp, I'm just darkening those edges, sort of mapping out the shapes of the nostrils and the lower half of the nose. I'm also just fairly roughly drawing in short little lines to resemble the hairs. And remember to always draw in the same direction that the fur's going in. Even if it feels a bit awkward to draw, just go with it. But where the hair sort of meets the nose is quite a tricky one because you need to give the impression that the nose is raised and higher than the fur around it. So you almost want to draw over that bottom outline just so it looks like the fur is curving up towards the nose, if that makes sense, so it looks raised. So then focusing on the top half again, I'm then going in with a French grey luminance pencil and sort of doing a similar thing that we did at the bottom, basically focusing on where the edges of the nose meet the fur. The light usually hits the top of the dog's face and the top of the nose, so when I'm drawing in those hairs, I'm being a lot softer with the strokes of the pencil and adding more pressure around the edges, sort of where the shadows are. And when I say I'm doing like softer strokes with my pencil, I just mean I'm applying quite a light pressure because I know that that's where the light hits, so that's where the highlights and the light tones are going to be. So I don't want to add too many layers to that section. I'm then using a raw umber luminance pencil and just starting to map out some of those shaded areas within the nose. The luminance pencils are really quite soft anyway, as they're predominantly wax based, whereas the polychromos are predominantly oil based, but they actually complement each other really well. Depending on how you layer them, you can achieve a really smooth texture because they sort of blend everything together so well and almost get rid of that grain from the paper completely just by layering. The luminance pencils have amazing colours for pet portraits as well. Some colours that the polychromos don't have is usually in the luminance pencils set. But you can also buy them individually as well because they're quite expensive actually. They're about £3, maybe a bit less, per pencil, where the polychromos are a bit less. But together they work really well. So I'm just going in with a beige red polychromo and I'm just working my way around from the outer edges of the nostrils to the top edges of the nose, basically starting to shade in some of those shadows a bit more. We're just sort of mapping in those initial colours at this point, so it doesn't matter too much if your pencil's quite blunt. As well, you always want to work light to dark with coloured pencils because it's a lot easier to build up layer upon layer to achieve those really intense dark areas than the other way around. So then I'm using the Polychromos, slightly darker than that one, which is in the shade Cinnamon, and I'm literally just drawing over all of those areas I just shaded in, applying quite a hard pressure this time, like making sure it's quite sharp as well. So apply quite a hard pressure on the edges of the nostril and then fade that out slightly towards the tip of the nose where the light will be directly hitting it. You might have noticed that the tip of the pencil just snapped off, but that always happens. As soon as you sharpen it and you apply quite a hard pressure with it, it immediately just snaps off. So yeah, just ignore that. So then using another polychromo in the shade Venetian Red, which again is a bit darker than what we've just used, I'm going to do the exact same process again and start defining that centre crease slightly and the remaining shape of the nostrils. And don't worry about it looking too pink at this point as well. I feel like every colour pencil drawing has a bit of an ugly stage whilst you're building up layers to get to the colours that you want. But this dog's nose is quite pink already, so these initial layers are going to be like an undertone almost for the darker layers later on. As you can see as well, I'm sort of drawing in the shading with like circular motions, just so it's like completely smooth and I'm not going in all different directions. So yeah, you want to start bringing that down the centre crease, start defining that line, but don't make it too dark, we're just using it as sort of a base really. Continuing to map out some of those shapes and adding more layers to those darker shaded areas. So then we're going to go back to the luminance pencils and we're going to use the colour Sepia, which almost looks like a lilac-y grey colour, but it's definitely one of the essential colours I'd say you need in pet portraits. And we're just going to start drawing in the sort of shadows and darker areas around the nostrils and beginning to add in some of that detail directly above each nostril as well. And then with a lighter pressure, you want to add a light layer down the centre crease of the nose and sort of draw over very softly those darker areas of Venetian red that we drew in previously. A dog's nose has so many different sort of elements and shapes within it as well. It kind of goes down into a sort of diamond shape, and then there's like different sections on the left and right under the nostrils. So with that same sepia colour, you just want to sort of refine that like diamond in the centre of the nose at the bottom. The nose also has a bit of an orangey tone to it as well, and because this is a golden Labrador's nose, they often have like pinky brown colours in them anyway. So by adding a really light layer of this burnt ochre, it's going to act as sort of a subtle undertone later on, which will look really nice. So now to sort of bring back some of those pinky tones again, I'm going to use the Carmine Lake Luminance pencil and start to, with quite a hard pressure this time, go along the outline of the nostrils and fill in some of that shading detail above the right nostril. And then with a really sharp black polychromo, you can then start to fill in the nostrils. And because the nostrils literally go in, if you will, they are like completely black, especially in the centre of each nostril. So we're not going to add any layers underneath the nostrils, we're just going to keep adding layer upon layer of the black and really squash down that tooth of the paper when you're shading that area in. Just to eliminate any grainy texture showing up from underneath and to keep it like jet black. You can then start doing the exact same process to the left nostril. Again, applying like a lot of pressure, a lot of layers, and really squashing down that tooth of the paper. I think noses particularly are all about the shading, because you want to give a sense of depth and the illusion that the nose is like coming out at you off the page almost, as it's a raised feature on the dog's face. So it really is all about achieving that sort of light and dark and getting the lighting and the colours like bang on. So once I'm happy with the nostrils and how they're looking at the minute, I'm then going to start to draw in some of that detail coming out of the nostril and like curve it round and down, so it looks like it's going into the nostril. Those shapes sort of give the illusion that the nostrils go in, which is what we want. We want that depth. So going back and using the French grey luminance pencil that we used earlier, I'm just sort of refining the very edges of the nose now and starting to smooth things together. I'm also just going to add a really light layer of the Venetian red that we used before as well, just to bring back some of those pinky tones and just basically draw over everything that we've done so far. As you keep adding layers, you can lose some of the colours that you've added as like your base layers, so it's about like push and pull, and if you feel like you need to add a bit more pink or a bit more orange here and there, then that's like completely fine at this stage. So now I'm using a dark indigo polychromo, and this is going to act as the base layer for the bottom half of the nose, which is a lot darker as it's in the shadows. So I'm firstly just drawing quite messily over those initial hairs I drew in earlier, sort of where the fur meets the edge of the nose. And as you can see as well, I'm applying a really light pressure, like really light, like literally hardly anything at this point, like just letting the pencil touch the paper. I'm then going to bring that up through the centre crease, again doing sort of a circular motion with my pencil strokes to keep everything smooth, and then I'm just filling in, again very lightly, those top edges of the nose and shadows around the nostrils. You then want to add your base layer all through the bottom of the nose, keeping the same light pressure throughout to achieve that even coverage of the paper. Avoid the sections directly under the nostrils, as they're going to be like the really intense white highlights later on. And then you want to work that up towards that diamond shape that I talked about before as well. So then, using a dark sepia, I'm really starting to add in some of those darker colours now. The dark sepia is like a really dark muddy brown, so it's going to bring all those pinky tones together. So adding sort of a medium to hard pressure this time, I'm just defining that centre crease and drawing in the bottom of that diamond shape, again with the circular smooth motion so everything's smooth and the colours are blended nicely together. I'm also just adding in that bit of detail coming out of the side of the nostril, which almost looks like a stripe. Then, using a warm grey 1, I'm adding a base layer to those highlighted areas directly under each nostril, just so the contrast isn't as intense. And I'm then just blending that area where it meets the dark sepia, and you can see already how that's smoothing out quite nicely as I'm pressing on quite hard. Going back in with the Carmine Lake, which is a really dark, deep red, almost like a maroon sort of colour, I'm starting at the centre crease and working outwards towards those shadows around the nostrils, and you can really get a sense of like depth at this point now that we've added quite a few layers to the nose. You can see how parts of the nose still look quite grainy as well, especially sort of the lower half. So going back in with the dark indigo again, I'm just adding another fairly light layer to the bottom sections and around the nostrils, sort of where the shapes meet the light again. And I'm also just very delicately drawing in some of that lovely texture on the top of the nose as well. And I'm being quite random with the marks I'm making, as I think it's more important to get the colours and the shapes and the sort of feel of the texture accurate, instead of worrying about producing an exact replica of your reference photo. Then using a walnut brown, which also has a bit of a pinky tint to it, I'm going over those same shadowy areas again, really hard this time, squashing down the tooth of the paper so everything looks smooth and blended, and I'm releasing that pressure and fading it out towards those lighter areas. To the lightest areas as well at the top of the nose, I'm just adding another layer of the beige red so there's not as much of a contrast. Then using a warm grey 2, which is another essential colour I'd say in pet portraits, I'm using this as almost like a blending tool to move those layers around so the light and dark colours are completely smooth and blended all together. And I'm just drawing in some of those hair details at the bottom as well, because although we're just drawing the nose, we don't want it to look like it's floating on the page. So you want to draw them hairs at the top and then bring them round and fill them in all at the bottom as well, going round the bottom of the nose. So now I'm going back in with my black polychromo, really defining those edges and working those hairs upwards towards the nose to create more depth. I'm really darkening that bottom area of the nose, and you can start to see how that grainy texture is disappearing the more layers that we're adding, and the harder that we're applying pressure as well, it's just completely getting rid of it. I'm sorry that it's quite out of focus at this point as well. You can just see my fat thumb in HD, which is not ideal. So hopefully it'll refocus in a second. You want to work up through that centre crease on the bottom part of the diamond shape as well. As we've added quite a lot of dark colours, I'm now using a carput mortuum polychromo to bring back some of those pinky tones again. I never know how to say it, but I think that's right, carput mortuum. It's a very similar colour to the Carmine Lake Luminance colour, but it'll just layer like a lot smoother compared to that one. If we went in with a light layer of the Luminance pencil at this point, because it's like wax based, it's going to go on like a crayon, if you know what I mean. Although the Luminance pencils are really smooth for those like first initial layers, I feel like the polychromos work better for like smoothness when you're about 10 to 20 layers in. It's all about how the two different brands of pencil work together really. Like the more you use them both together, the more you can really get a feel for what works and what doesn't, and at what point as well. Like especially when it comes to like layering. The polychromos being predominantly oil based are really hard, so they stay sharp for quite a while. So I'm just drawing in some of that texture on the top of the nose, being quite random with it, but really delicate at the same time. Although I'm not copying every single texture detail from the reference photo, I'm still trying to be quite precise. I'm almost drawing in like little tiny circles. And then I'm just going back in with the Venetian red again, brightening up those pinky undertones. Now, because this Labrador's been photographed outside, there's obviously quite a lot of blue being reflected off the lighter sections in the nose from the blue sky. So we're going to use a sky blue polychromo. The name of the colour is quite fitting actually. But very, very lightly start to shade in some of those highlighted areas, like the very top of the nose, parts of the fur around the edges, and those highlighted sections under each nostril. You can press on quite hard as well to keep everything blended, and because there's quite a few layers on there already, the blue won't transfer on like too intensely. It'll just come out as like a really subtle blue, which is what we want. I'm then just adding a touch of burnt sienna to like those rusty orangey brown sections of colour within the nose. So then using a walnut brown or a Van Dyck brown, either of them will work well for this. You just want to start smoothing out that shading down the centre of the nose, and you can start refining some of those details then. You still want to be quite delicate, just pick out like small sections of texture just to like redefine. Going back to your black polychromo again, it's now just really about making those dark areas as black as you can, so that the creases in the nose, the nostrils, and some of those hairs that meet the edges of the nose. You want to redraw those curved lines we did initially, coming out of the nostril and curving down, which really creates a sense of depth and that the nostrils are like going in. So yeah, you just want to darken that centre crease and work up towards the rest of the nose and darken that diamond shape as well. I'm just going to lightly refine some of those texture details on top, just picking certain sections out and refining them slightly, just like we did a second ago with the brown. And I'm just going to elongate some of those first strands, making them quite dark, applying a hard pressure. Although it's a golden Labrador with like light coloured fur, you'll find that almost every dog has sort of like a rougher, wiry, darker hairs like under its nose, directly under its nose. So don't worry too much about making the fur like overly detailed either. This focus tutorial was mainly just to talk you through like the process of how I draw a dog's nose and like what pencils I use and how I use them. So after I've finished with that black, I'm just smoothing out those highlighted areas under each nostril with the Sepia Luminance pencil, and again just adding in some extra texture details on the top. Now because the Luminance pencils are predominantly wax based and quite soft, when you're drawing over dark colours it can like pick them up on the tip of the pencil, so I tend to just give it a wipe with my finger and it comes off straight away. Just because you don't then want to like transfer any black anywhere else. You want the pencil to remain clean when you start doing your strokes again. Then with an ivory coloured polychromo, we're just going to add a light layer over the very top of the nose where it meets the fur. This colour is like another essential for pet portraits, I'd say, but especially for golden labradors. And then to finish off with those lovely white highlights, I'm just using a white CARAN D'ACHE Pablo pencil, which again is quite soft, but it's not as soft as the Luminance, I don't think anyway. It sort of feels like a mixture between the two, like the Luminance and the Polychromos. It feels like a mixture between them. So I'm just picking out where the light hits the dog's nose really, and going over that with quite a hard pressure. Then using a UNIBALL fine nib POSCA pen, which is about £3 from like Amazon or Hobbycraft, I'm literally just dotting in those intense white areas, and it kind of gives the impression that the dog's nose is like wet or moist, which is what we want. I talk about this pen quite a lot and like more about how I use it over on Patreon. And then I'm just finishing off with a tiny splash of purple on the outer corners of the nose. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you use this focus tutorial to practice your techniques or explore layering or whatever it is, then I'd love to see any work that you do, so please tag me on socials or send me a photo. All my social media links are in the description below, and if you like this tutorial and maybe want to try a few more in-depth start to finish pieces using coloured pencils, then please pop over to Patreon and have a browse. And yeah, once again, thank you so much for watching. And please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you.